Hello and welcome to Access Studio. My name is Nancy Gesimondo and I'm very pleased to be visiting the studio of Diane Martin here in Long Island City, New York. Diane is a printmaker first and foremost. Her process begins by making monotypes on an etching press with leaves and other natural materials. The images are further developed with pastel, watercolor, gouache, colored pencils, and collage. Diane obtained a BFA in painting from Rhode Island School of Design and a master's degree in painting from the University of Iowa. She was a resident fellow at the Virginia Center for the Creative Arts, where she spent her residency developing and exploring new mediums and processes. Diane served as the chair of the Visual Art Department at the Spence School in Manhattan and taught fine art for 33 years. Her work has been represented by Catherine Markel in New York City. She was a member of NoHo Gallery in Manhattan for several years, and her work has been exhibited in both the Brooklyn Museum and the Queens Museum. She has been in both solo and group shows in galleries on the East End of Long Island, including the East End Arts Council Gallery in Riverhead, Long Island, and alternative spaces in Manhattan. Diane is also listed in the Who's Who in American Art. Currently, Diane is a longtime member of LICA, Long Island City Artists, and was featured as their Artist Spotlight in August 2020. Diane participates in the annual Long Island City Arts Open Festival, in addition to hosting her own open studio events, where her collectors can learn more about her process and see her newest work. Diane's work is held in many private and corporate collections, including those of Pfizer, PepsiCo, Credit Suisse, David Rockefeller Jr., and the Manhattan Musicians Union. Diane's work is deeply contemplative. Her images are filled with nuances that imbue both mystery and meaning. Delicate bits of plant life, flowers, and birds are prevalent elements that appear throughout her work. Diane has always been a dedicated and passionate gardener. Her backyard garden, blooming with flowers, provides both inspiration and materials. Diane says that she also picks up weeds from the street outside her studio because she feels that the least weed deserves the same notice and respect as the most beautiful rose. Diane's work reflects an unmistakable sense of reverence for nature. The labor of tender nurturing is evident as she adds layers upon layers of colored pencil and watercolor until the images emerge. Her landscapes seem to exist in a delicate state of emerging and decay. Diane's invented landscapes are layered with details and conjure a secret world that bridge reality and imagination. In this series, she places slivers of photographic cutouts to comprise imagery of birds and feathers. So the viewer is challenged to look more closely to discover what the work is actually about. In the 1970s, Diane's work reflects the direction of the times as she was experiencing the women's liberation movement. This body of work addresses associations and concepts of femininity. Larger-than-life pastel drawings and watercolors of items like lipstick and women's clothing are a statement of female empowerment. This work is an act of commandeering personal feminine items to become legitimate subjects for still lifes and was exhibited in a solo show titled The Empress's New Clothes at the NoHo Gallery in 1982. Hi Diane, thank you so much for having me in your studio today.
Welcome, Nancy. It's so good to see you again.
Thank you. What led to your development as an artist, and when did you know that making art was your vocation?
Well, as a child, my parents moved around a lot. I went to 13 different grade schools from kindergarten through the 6th grade. And so since I didn't have any siblings, I spent a great deal of time alone. And so since I was always interested in drawing and coloring, so I was able to develop some skills at a relatively early age. And so when I finally ended up being able to be in one place, I met this wonderful guy named Mr. Zved, who became my private art teacher for a while. And at the time, I was very accomplished at doing pictures of ballet dancers in pastel. I received a lot of praise for that. Mr. Sved was not interested at all in my pastel ballet dancers at all. He had me doing big oil paintings of cow skulls. He was the one who mentioned Rhode Island School of Design. And so when I got to RISD, I was one of many people who were like the best art student in their high school class. No one cared about you, that you were the best student in your high school class. No one talked about art. People talked about work. People didn't talk about being an artist. People talked about what they did. And even today, I prefer to be called what I do. I'm a printmaker, mm-hmm. or I'm a painter, rather than being called an artist.
So what led you to printmaking?
I ended up taking this really wonderful printmaking class at the Baltimore Museum of Art. The kind of printmaking I do now, which is monotypes, are unique things. I'm not interested in making my own ink. I'm not interested in doing, I'm really interested in doing the open-ended, free way of using a press and making an image, much as you would use a brush in making a painting. A press is an instrument with which you could make an image.
So what is your inspiration to start a new piece, and what are the criteria you're trying to achieve?
It could be a mood or a color. Usually one piece will grow out of another. I do tend to work in series. If all else fails, I am a great devotee of a possibly apocryphal statement by Jasper Johns, and that is do something, and then do something to that, and then do something to that. If you put yourself in a place where you're doing things, something is likely to happen. I so much believe in that.
So what do you find is the most challenging aspect of making art?
I am very lucky at this stage of my life to have solved the space and time problem. I no longer have my day job because I love teaching, but nevertheless, it took up almost all my time. And luckily for me, I have copious studio space. I'm very, very lucky. The time that I had that was really wonderful to have while I was still teaching, I had the real gift of a residency at the Virginia Center for the Creative Arts. I was there for about a month, maybe a little more than a month, but I got the amount of work done while I was there that probably at least 3 months' work, maybe more. That's why artists go to have residencies or apply for residencies, because the rest of your life isn't there. You totally focus on what you're doing. I was able to experiment with different materials. It was the most wonderful experience. One of the other challenges is that as the physical aspects of making a print, especially as I get older, you spend very long periods of time standing up, inking, rolling the press. I don't want to give up making prints. It's a great love of mine.
Which artists were some of your greatest influences?
A lot of artists have been influences of mine. Italian Renaissance art, particularly Piero della Francesca, in a more modern times, Jasper Johns, of course, I've already mentioned, many, many people. But I think my entire life, I think one artist has been a really prevalent influence, and that's Joseph Cornell. His art is what I think art should be. It is personal, it is closed, and it is completely compelling. That's what I think art should be. So even though my work, I don't think, looks anything like Joseph Cornell's work, his work stands as a kind of a goal, something to attain. When I was in graduate school, I even made a couple of feminine Cornell box kind of things, and then I thought, no, I cannot go there. I cannot start making imitation Cornell boxes. So I literally threw them away. Cornell is, a very big favorite of mine.
Like Cornell, your work is comprised of a personal vocabulary of images that have a deep meaning for you. And I notice in your series from the 1970s with the clothing, you incorporate a number of things into that work, Italian architecture, the landscape, and these feminine items. Can you tell me more about that series?
It does go back to the Cornell thing, that I wanted to have a very personal, intense connection to the images that I use. Probably the most important thing to me. I can't use an image if I don't feel that I have right to use it. That I have a connection to it, that I have a reason to have that connection to it. Italian landscape is there for numerous reasons. I love Italian Renaissance painting, particularly the art of Piero della Francesca, and so that's the place where that comes from. Feminine items were obviously things that I used. The lipstick, the paper doll dress has lots of associations. Certainly paper dolls were things that I played with as a child. They were some of my first art projects. It's a way of creating personas for yourself as a young girl. That's the reason it's a paper doll dress. The skirt is a reference to my own junior prom dress. The bodice of the dress is, on the other hand, a sort of a brocade, Italian Renaissance sort of brocade. And then the landscape in the background is not copied from an Italian Renaissance painting, but it certainly refers to it. In this book by Piero, you can see landscapes in the background of these portraits that are idealized by Piero. Piero did not do these from life. These are idealized landscapes in the background of these portraits. And so in the background of the paper doll dress is my version of an idealized Italian landscape of that time. And so the image for me is sort of packed with very personal kinds of things. In the lipstick piece, I was trying to make a statement. I wanted it to be amusing. Here is this big lipstick, which is this really phallic form. And it is a very feminine form. And the case, I think, is quite beautiful with the reflections in the case. And in this landscape. And so I wanted it to be really feminine and very assertive at the same time. And so playing with scale is certainly one way to do that.
The landscape is such a prevalent element in your work. Can you discuss why that is such a draw for you?
Certainly. The land, whether it's a smaller bit of land here in the garden, or whether it's the landscape of Eastern Long Island, has been for so many years really my main subject matter. And so those two elements, I guess you might say, sort of closer up nature in terms of the garden, literally plants, and then wider open nature in terms of the bays and creeks and the open aspects of land and sea out in Southold. They really have informed my work.
Another of your series where you use the landscape or bits of nature is your fan series. Can you tell me what was the inspiration for the fan?
When I moved back totally here to Long Island City after Southold, this goes back to what I was saying before about having a connection, a really personal, intense connection to the images that I use. I felt for a time that I had lost the connection to the use of the landscape. And so I literally had to find a way to bring the image back inside, to find a way to construct an image that would still use nature. I was still using things from the garden, things that I would pick up on the street outside, still making monotypes. All of the process was the same. But in terms of building an image, the idea of using a wider horizon line kind of landscape, that was something that I just didn't feel comfortable doing that for a very long time. And so I made a conscious decision to use a fan as a motif. The fan motif is certainly out there. Many, many artists have used the fan motif. It was in the 19th century. Another famous favorite artist of mine, Degas, used the fan motif extensively to make images, not usable fans, but images. And so I felt, okay, this is something that's out there. It's been out there for a long time, and so it's something that I can use. And so I did use it for many images, and it allowed me to have essentially a kind of an armature, much as a sculpture would have an armature to build a sculpture on. It was a scaffolding on which I could use to build an image. And so I made a series of pieces using fans. I enjoyed doing that. I think I have made the last fan image, but they served as a way. They served their purpose.
I noticed that birds and feathers are often in your work. What is their significance for you?
I've always used birds in my work. My experience at RISD was absolutely seminal in this. The fact that RISD has this wonderful, wonderful place called the Nature Lab, which is totally unique, which is filled with these wonderful stuffed birds I have worked from at various times over the years. Birds have always been such an important part of my work. I think they have a deeply human presence, both as observers and as subjects. And so in all of my work, they flit in and out. They've appeared in many, many different ways. They've appeared in Italian sort of archways, and combined with small other bits of nature, totally out of scale. Appeared in combined with shells in a kind of sheltered nest-like kind of form.
I love the piece you're talking about. That's one of my favorites.
Yeah. There's a piece that I did years ago that I called Bird for Manet, a favorite artist of mine, who did, towards the end of his life, some really wonderful watercolors of vases of flowers. I actually did a painting as best as I could of this beautiful watercolor of Manet, and then I put this wonderful bird sitting on top of the flowers. It was a kind of a tribute to Manet. And so they kind of come and go. In one of the pieces that you've liked, I think it's an invented landscape, and it's actually, people think that it's made of feathers. It's not. It's actually leaves, but it looks like feathers. And then it's got little bits of birds in it, but they're not really birds. They're other things that look like birds, and it's called Twitter. And so birds are always, they're not far away in almost all of my work.
One of the things that always impresses me when I look at the career, a lifespan of an artist's work, is how their ideas have evolved through either different materials, different processes, or when entirely new series are birthed. How did you go from printmaking to some of your cutout collages to these other box creations where the paper is peeled away?
I'm glad you liked the boxes. Those were certainly a departure. They evolved out of making prints, and I started making, well, I've done quite a lot of work actually making layered prints. In other words, a couple, one thing in front of another, and then cutting out an area so that you have a literal layer, but those weren't that three-dimensional. But I did quite a number of those, and so I like the idea of creating a little bit of additional space, literal space. But then I started with the idea of cutting into the print, and so I was printing on both sides of the paper, so that when I cut into the paper, I could peel back the paper and work with the paper. Printmaking paper is very thick and pliable, and so that you can work with it really sculpturally. You can peel it back and work with it like that. And so I did a number of pieces like that, and I really, really enjoyed doing them. But I got to the point when I was doing those that I realized that the next step when I was doing these was that they would need to, I could easily start thinking about these in the round. The paper, I could easily start working up with those in the round. And I just didn't want to go there. The reason is that I am a two-dimensional artist. I deal in illusion. I really deal with the illusion of space or ideas behind that two-dimensional surface. That is what really is magical to me. And sculpture is real. It is, you can pick it up. You can feel it. I don't want to do that. I want to deal with illusion. And so I just couldn't do it.
Now you're working in a whole new medium, gouache, and those pieces are extremely illusionistic.
I guess you're right. I guess they are illusionistic.
They're very mystical and like, kind of like they're being born into space, and they're... Discuss why that process and that medium is now captivating you.
I really had this idea of, or this urge to work with paint, and specifically gouache paint. And it was just I couldn't ignore it. And so and using gouache with a watercolor technique, so that the paint would go where it wanted to go, and the paint would create the space. And that was what attracted me to it, is that it would create this illusionistic space by itself, and that I wasn't in control of it. And that is still what attracts me to it. Now, I work with the image afterwards, and I develop it, and maybe I try to find out where the space is as best I can, although I haven't really discovered that yet. They are still very unknown to me. They are they're very mysterious. You're right about that. Very mysterious. And so we'll see what happens to them, whether they stay as vast. To me, they're very vast spaces, which is what differentiates them from the kinds of landscapes that I did previously. I never thought of those spaces as being vast at all. I thought of them as being very inhabited spaces. But these spaces are very, very vast and unknown. But they are I'm very drawn to them, I have to say. I haven't been put off doing them.
And you just sold one that was like barely just finished, right?
Yes, amazing.
So where can one see more of your work?
Well, I'm very much hoping that the conditions will allow me to have soon another open studio. I had a really nice open studio just this past December, and I was so happy to welcome so many people in my studio at that time. But in the meantime, I think if people were willing, I think to have one or two people in my studio would certainly be possible. And I could, I have a big studio. There's enough socially distanced space in here. I can certainly show people what I do and show them my work. So I'd welcome them to come.
Well, thank you so much for having me in your studio today, Diane. It was a pleasure to learn more about your work and to talk with you today.
Oh, thank you, Nancy.
Thank you for tuning in to Access Studio today. I hope you enjoyed this episode with Diane Martin and that you'll tune in next time.